Hi, everybody. My name is Corey Cook. I'm an instructor with the International Institute for Restorative Practices. And today we are going to do an overview of affect psychology, shame, as well as a central blueprint. Let's begin. Okay. So we're going to first start off talking about Sylvan Tompkins and his contemporaries who helped develop this idea of affect psychology. And in a nutshell, what we're looking at here are three main pieces of that theory. Now, affects, according to Tompkins and his contemporaries, are 9 innate biological programs triggered in response to specific stimuli and conditions. So it's our subconscious. It's what's built into us. Then there are the feelings. The feelings are an awareness that an affect is present. And lastly is emotions. Emotions are these scripted responses learned over a lifetime of triggering of affects by environmental forces that surround us. So a simple way to remember what Tompkins is trying to teach us here are affects are our biology, feelings are our psychology, and emotions are our biography. So when we put this together, it really helps us to understand how we individually respond when confronted with situations in our daily lives. Now, considering the idea we're focusing on conferencing, it's going to be very important to understand how human beings respond to one another when shame is present. And we'll get to that in just a minute. Continuing with Tompkins' work, and we talked about the 9 affects, this is a scale of those affects that Tompkins discusses. Now, there's 2 positive affects. There are a total of 6 negative affects, and then there's that neutral area, that surprise startle. And we're really going to focus on that surprise startle as well as shame. Now, what Tompkins is telling us is that typically we experience life in a positive affect environment. So typically we're experiencing some level of enjoyment to joy, as well as interest to excitement, and all of the positive things that are in between those. Those aren't just the only 2. There's many, of course. And sometimes when our positive affect is interrupted, we have that surprise startle, we have that moment of shame or that interruption, we then experience some type of negative affect. And sometimes these are just quick, millisecond feelings, or sometimes they can last quite a long time depending on what has happened. But these negative affects range from shame and humiliation all the way down to dismell. And dismell is a word that Tompkins created. And if you think about it, it's that face you would make when you taste something horrible or very sour and you respond in that way. Now, what we are trying to help everybody understand is that even if our positive affect is interrupted and we do go down to negative, there are going to be ways to move that individual back to the positive. That's where Nathanson's work comes in, and we start to talk about shame. Now, shame, as most of us know, shame is not used or described or defined as an impediment to positive affect. We're used to hearing shame described as something that refers to a feeling of guilt or remorse or something along those lines, definitely associated with something negative that either we did or has happened to us. Now, Nathanson built off of Tompkins' work, and when he came up with this idea of the compass of shame, and again, we're thinking about shame as an interrupter of positive affect, he identified these 4 points of the compass: withdrawal, attack self, avoidance, and attack others. And each and every one of us does primarily have one primary point on the compass that we tend to display when we are feeling that shame or that interruption of positive affect. As an example, attack self. That's what I do. When I make a mistake, I sometimes beat it to death. I really try to figure out why I made the mistake, and I do everything I possibly can to never make that mistake again. And sometimes it's even the smallest of things, but I'll obsess over it. You also have withdrawal. Withdrawal, withdrawal is really, receding or avoiding. And when we get into that avoidance, we're talking about denial. And we're talking about even possibly using drugs or alcohol to kind of shield us from whatever is causing us that feeling of shame. And then, of course, there's attack others. This can be verbally, this could be physically, this could be done in a multitude of ways. But what Tompkins is saying, we all have a point on our compass that helps to show our moment of shame. Now, Tompkins also talks to us about how inside this compass of shame, it's very possible for us to kind of move through, very similar in regards to the social discipline window. In the social discipline window, we, of course, primarily want to be with, but we can move throughout depending on the situation. And it's the same here. So depending on that interruption, what has caused that interruption of positive affect, we definitely could experience a different type of shame. So when we think about shame in this way, in the way that Tompkins is suggesting through his theory, specific to the idea that we are trying to figure out a way to get back to positive affect from that momentary interruption, one of the simplest things that we can do is help people respond to that feeling of shame. So when we are thinking about the students that we work with, our colleagues, our children, our spouses, what we're trying to do is we're trying to help support them in learning how to navigate out of negative affect back to positive. So when we are seeing somebody exhibiting shame or a shame response, here are some simple tips that we can do. So the first thing that we can do is just sit down and listen to what this person has to say. You let them talk. We don't interrupt them. We don't do anything but listen. We're not going to problem solve for them. This is not our problem to solve. This is their problem to solve. We're going to help them reflect on what has caused that shame feeling. We're going to acknowledge their feelings, and we're going to continue them to encourage speaking about this situation. When we are dealing with shame, we really want people to understand how to navigate through this themselves. If we continuously do the work for them, the individual is never going to truly learn how to go from that negative to positive on their own. They're always going to need somebody else. So that's the important piece of this. Now, when we think again, and we're taking Tompkins' idea of affect psychology and Nathanson's understanding of the compass of shame, and we're merging the two, and now we're getting into the idea of conferencing, and we're thinking about how harm has caused such a turmoil in our community, we have to start thinking now on broader scale. So no longer are we thinking individually, but now we are going to start to talk about the central blueprint. Now, when we think about the central blueprint, we are going, of course, needing to talking about individuals, okay? Individuals we know are at their healthiest and at their best when they maximize positive affect, minimize negative affect, minimize the ambition of affect, and do as much of the above three as possible. Now, let's just break that down just a little bit. When we are talking about individuals maximizing positive affect, we're hoping that this individual is going to take the positive things that they're doing in their life and do more of them. We're also hoping that when an individual is impacted in a negative way, we're going to confront that feeling or that action, and we're going to learn how to work through it. And then when we minimize the inhibition of affect, this is where we need to be brave, and we need to feel safe, and we need to have some type of support to help us avoid those negative affects so we can move back into that positive. And if we can do the above three as much as possible, we stand a chance, again, at moving back up into that positive affect. We take this central idea and we're going to expand on it. And this is where Vernon or Vic Kelly really takes Tompkins' central blueprint and expands upon it to talk about interpersonal relationships. And this has a direct correlation to conferencing, because in conferencing, if you remember from your reading, you're dealing with someone who has caused harm and someone who has been harmed. Or if you are using the vocabulary of offender and victim, this is where this really comes into play. Now, when we are talking about interpersonal relationships, what we're really saying is that to have healthy intimacy and positive emotional connections, for them to occur when two people agree to maximize and neutralize their positive affects, minimize and neutralize their negative affects, minimize, neutralize the inhibition of affect, and do as much of the above three as possible. Now we have the potential to solve this challenge that's in front of us for the conference. So when we're really looking at people or couples, we are trying to help these individuals understand the relationships in regards to how we interact with each other. So yes, harm has been caused. And yes, people have been impacted. But if we can figure out how to work with one another, going back to that social discipline window, we can get out of that negative affect and move back into the positive affect. But we have to learn how to do it together. From here, when we're thinking about how we are going to minimize the negative, we go one step further. We now talk about community. So again, in a conference, it's not just the person who caused the harm and the person who has been harmed. We're also talking about the supporters. How many of them are there? So now it's community is right here, and we're willing to work through this, and we're able to agree to maximize and neutralize positive affect, minimize and neutralize negative affect, minimize and neutralize the inhibition of affect, and do as much of the above three as possible. So again, as a community, we're being brave. We're creating a safe space. We're able to find out what we are feeling. We're able to share those feelings and help each other work through that interruption of shame, interruption of positive affect because of shame, and get back to positive affect. This idea of community is really imperative for conferencing to work. Remember that a conference is designed to repair harm. And out of that conference, if we can repair the harm as well as repair community, now we really are in a position where we can show positive change. Now, Tompkins, Nathanson, and Kelly all provided us some really foundational material that helped Terry O'Connell, who was the director of IRP Australia, develop this next process. And what Terry O'Connell was able to do in 2014, he was able to identify how the restorative process, the conference process, the actions and emotions all interplay with affect psychology and shame. So when we start the conference, and you recall this from your readings, when we start the conference, we're doing a past part, the storytelling part. We're asking the person who caused the harm or the offender, what happened? We're asking the person who was harmed the same questions, the supporters the same questions. And in this process, we hear from that person responsible, we hear from the victim and the supporters, we hear from the family and supporters of the person responsible. And we're seeing the actions that we talked about in regards to responding to shame. We're acknowledging, we're listening, we're validating, we're allowing ownership to occur. And then we talk about the connection to affect theory. So now we're talking about distress, disgust, anger, shame, anxiety, all the feelings that Tompkins was telling us through his theory. Now, as the conference progresses, we get into the present. Now we're in reflection. And we're now asking the individuals who are responsible for harm, what else do you have to say? What else can you help us with? And the actions that we should see, if this is working correctly, are remorse and reflection. And then we're going reverse. We're going from negative. Now we re-interrupted that negative affect, and we see that surprise and interest. And if the conference is doing what it's supposed to do, That gets us to the future where we're asking all the participants on how we should move things forward, what we can agree to, how we can close this, how we can reintegrate not only the harm from the parties, but how we can make things right. And we see acknowledgement, attribution, reflection, normalization, so on and so forth. And we now move back up to that positive affect where we see interest, excitement, enjoyment, and contentment. And folks, with that, we're taking the ideas that Tompkins had, directly applying them along with Nathanson's work and Kelly's work into conferencing. And so we can say very clearly, if done right, if we follow the script, if we follow the protocol, we actually can take someone who's experiencing shame and maybe not know how to work through it, teach them some lessons on how to work through it, repair the harm, and provide an opportunity for everybody to heal. And I'm going to leave you with this. Terry O'Connell once said, there's no nice way to poke somebody in the eye. And I'm going to add to it, so let's not poke anybody in the eye. I hope you have a great day. I hope you enjoyed this overview, and I hope to see you soon. Take care.